Renee, congratulations. I'll meet you on the golf course if you want to take up golf, or we can go fishing. Yeah, we can go sit on one of those 5-gallon buckets on the causeway and catch us a mess.
That sounds like good advice. Maybe Renee will take Johnette up on that. She's about to have a lot of time on her hands, that's for sure.
Certainly well deserved, but we are going to miss her. After 40 years at WALA, Renee is retiring. In fact, Friday is her last day.
That's right. She has covered a lot of stories in that time, from a devastating hurricane and the horrific hate crime of a teenage boy to the story of a dog who changed the law and everything else in between.
That's right. I had a chance to speak with Renee about all of it, and she tells me the stories she won't soon forget and why. September 12, 1979, a date hammered into the memory of many people along the Gulf Coast. That is when Hurricane Frederick slammed ashore.
Clouds from Hurricane Frederick are increasing, and Mobile, like the rest of the world, know these skies could become violent at any time.
So that was probably my first big story after moving here a couple of years earlier.
Renee Dials was a new mom at the time and vividly remembers riding out that storm.
A good possibility that this system could hit 50 miles either side of Mobile Bay right now.
I remember I was at home in my garage with my dog in the car listening to the radio, and the winds were howling outside, and for the first time I was aware of all those trees around my house and wondering if they were going to fall.
A beast of a hurricane, Frederick carved a path of destruction through Alabama, Mississippi, and the Florida coast. Mobile County taking a direct hit, howling winds topping 130 miles per hour and a towering storm surge. Renee covered the devastation.
To give you a sense of how I really didn't understand the magnitude of what had happened, there was this feeling that maybe in a few weeks this would all be over and we'd be back to normal.
12 people died. It took years to recover. And from a monster storm to a monstrous crime. Renee's second most memorable story, Michael Donald.
That really affected me, to cover a story that involved a lynching.
In the early 80s, the 19-year-old was lynched in a random hate crime by the KKK. Donald was alone, walking home when he was stopped on the road for directions by his murderers. Donald was beaten to death, had his throat cut, and was left hanging from a tree in Midtown Mobile.
It's kind of surreal. You're wondering, is this really happening? Did this really happen to a person? You know, I'd read about it, I'd heard about it, but I never thought I'd be faced with that kind of situation.
Donald's mother, Beulah May, challenged the Klan and the criminal justice system. Ultimately, she was awarded $7 million in damages, which bankrupted the KKK.
After Donald's death, their mother lost her joyful smile.
Renee interviewed Beulah May Donald, and she says her ability to forgive is what stood out the most.
The lack of real hatred for or revenge seeking from the mother, it was profound. She prayed for the people involved. She just had a very spiritual, prayerful attitude about it. She didn't allow it to fill her heart with hatred.
One of Donald's killers was electrocuted. The other spent much of his life in jail, and an accomplice served a substantial sentence. It was the last recorded lynching in the United States history. But it wouldn't be the last history-making event Renee would cover.
I heard a dog yelping, then all of a sudden this little guy burst into flames.
Renee didn't just cover the news. One of her stories was instrumental in strengthening animal cruelty laws in Alabama.
This particular story was one that we might have overlooked or missed because it involved an animal, and we don't cover every animal cruelty story that happens.
17 years ago, as a puppy, Gucci was hung, beaten, and doused in lighter fluid, then set on fire.
This was an innocent puppy. It was not only set on fire, it was strung up. It was horrific. And you wonder who could do something like this to an animal.
The dog survived and was found by Dr. Doug James. He took Gucci in and cared for him all his life. Renee did many stories about Gucci and the successful fight, which now makes animal cruelty a felony in the state of Alabama. one of the more gut-wrenching stories, the killings of 4 children at the hands of their father.
The inevitable nightmare that we have feared has now been confirmed.
That's the kind of story where you go home in tears.
One by one, Lam Long threw his children to their deaths from the Dauphin Island Bridge. The judge said the children were still alive despite that 80-foot plunge. Renee covered the funeral.
Obviously, because these were babies. And anytime a story affects children, that's going to hit home for you. And the way they died, that just added to the pain and the fact that they were just small, innocent children.
Long was sentenced to death in 2009 for the murders. Through it all, Renee tackled each story with grace and vigor.
I never want to let the story change me or bring me down. And you know, that could easily happen when you deal with tragedy on a regular basis. But in the end, when I go home, I want to bring encouragement to my family and the people around me. So over the years, that's been my focus.
Renee told me it's not that all of her memorable stories are sad, but given the changing times, we didn't have all the video for her favorable moments, including a story that she did about a hot dog eating contest in Pensacola.